My grandma took us to the Kingdom Hall. I told you already that we went to 5 meetings a week. My mom didn't ever get a driver's license. We never had a car. I mean, we were that poor. We couldn't afford a car. And so we walked everywhere to get groceries, to doctor's appointments. But the Kingdom Hall was too far away. So even though my grandma was completely crippled with arthritis and in a wheelchair, she never quit working every day. She and my step-grandpa had a photography studio. They lived over it, and she had to go up and down those stairs. And oh my gosh, her life was not an easy one. And when she died, I was one of 66 surviving grandchildren. And if they were Jehovah's Witnesses, we all stayed closely connected, but I barely knew the others. But most of them all were Jehovah's Witnesses. And they all came in, the sisters all came in at the same time my mom did, and then everybody had lots of kids. And I was one of 5 children, all born the same year. There were 5 of us cousins born in 1950, and oh, we were so close and had such fun at the family reunions and things. And now they've all shunned me now, well, since 1975. But they have to. They believe they have to. I mean, I don't fault them for it. I still cry over it, but the family reunion on the 4th of July, I mean, it was my reason for living. It was my Christmas. We went to my aunt's house on Fish Lake, and I loved seeing my mom happy with her family. And they had a rope swing, and we'd jump out into the water, and in the winter we'd go ice skating. But I mean, that 4th of July, that was just I look forward to it all year and hoped for good weather. And I think it's why to this day I'm kind of big on family reunions. When I was about 9 years old, my mom caught the flu, and I had already gone to bed one night, and I heard a loud crash out of the living room, and she had passed out carrying a glass of milk, and it hit the floor and broke, and she passed out with her eyes wide open, and I thought she was dead. And I mean, I woke up and ran to the living room, and there she laid with her, eyes wide open, and I literally brought her to by my screaming. What happened? What happened? I was just screaming, and when she came to, she said, "Call Aunt Louise." Well, Aunt Louise was disfellowship. She couldn't quit smoking, and if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you are not allowed to smoke, and so she was disfellowship for it, and that meant none of us were supposed to talk to her. My mom, she used to babysit for me, and now my mom we couldn't go to her house, which was just across the street. We couldn't talk to her, associate with her, but Mom said, "Call Aunt Louise," because she needed help. And Aunt Louise came over, and she always had a big smile for everyone, and I refused to shun her from that day. I mean, she had some pretty devastating events happen in her life because of being a Jehovah's Witness. In fact, they found her with her head in her oven because she tried to gas herself to death because she couldn't handle the shunning. She wasn't even born and raised in it. She just was the only one in her whole family who couldn't seem to stop smoking. I witnessed her husband, who never was a Jehovah's Witness, but he picked up their son, Buddy, when he was about, 11 years old, threw him clear across the room, he slammed into the wall and slid down. But he ended up going to prison, and I really felt bad for him always because he stole something. I can't even remember. And then he died when he was like 29 years old. And, I always have hoped that maybe, just maybe, there was some kind of a friend or person while he was in prison. Because he had been born and raised Jehovah's Witness. And I just always hoped that maybe, some way, somehow, someone had got to him and been able to share that he had believed lies about God and about himself. And I just so hope that I'll see him again one day. Really, really hoping for that. When I turned about 12 years old, that was when old Chubby Checker was singing the twist. And, oh my gosh, I can remember dancing the twist to that song at home. I mean, I wasn't allowed to do anything, but if Mom wasn't home, I wasn't allowed to change the radio station on. But when she would leave, of course I would, and I'd dance the twist. But I got concerned that when I was turning 12, that I had been this rebel, and I thought, maybe I better buckle up and start being a good Jehovah's Witness, and I'm going into this this new 7th grade school. I was a little afraid of that, and so I vacation pioneered that summer, and that means you have to go lots of hours knocking on doors. And when Jehovah's Witnesses used to be in the early days, you wrote down your time that you spent knocking on doors, and nowadays they just stand in one spot and they have their little rack with their literature on it, and they don't have to go through being thrown off of porches and mean dogs and going into the projects being afraid. And I mean, I was 12 years old, for heaven's sake. In fact, one lady, when I knocked on her door, she said, "You're just a little girl." And I thought, you know what, she's right, I am just a little girl. But after weeks and weeks of doing it, I confided to my mom. I said, I just don't enjoy serving Jehovah like you do. And she gave me some pretty great advice that day. She said, maybe you ought to pray about it. That night when I went to bed, this 12-year-old heart very sincerely said, Jehovah, I'm sorry that I don't like serving you like my mom does. Could you make me want to serve you? And I went to bed, went to sleep, and never thought about it again. I went into my teens, convinced that he'd destroy me if Armageddon ever happened. Well, now, my best friend Mary and her family moved away when we were in junior high. And oh my gosh, I missed her terribly. And we'd talk on the phone and stuff, and she was going to go to this place where it was a teen dance place. And I just begged and begged my mom, could I go meet Mary on Friday night at this place? And it was within walking distance from my house. And my mom said, yeah, I could go for an hour or so. And so I went, and I don't know what happened, if maybe my Jehovah's Witness aunts found out about it, and they said, you better get her out of there. If the elders find out that you let her go, you're going to be in trouble. I don't know what happened. All I know is my aunt's husband, my uncle, was a policeman, and he showed up at that dance in his uniform and walked me out of there. Oh my gosh, I was so embarrassed. And fierce hatred began to grow within me towards my mom that night. When I got home, I went into the bathroom and shut the door, and I wailed for hours. And I mean, days and nights. From that day on, I spent days and nights wailing in desperation in my room at my miserable existence. It felt like I was locked up in prison with no way out. Nobody wanted me or loved me, but nobody was willing to let me go free either. And it all seemed so unfair to me that I actually went to the welfare office and tried to get taken out of my home, because Mary's parents always said that they'd love to have me come live with them. So anyway, the music became my salvation. The music in the 60s was pretty great anyway, and it was happy music. I still to this day call it my happy music. And but it also made me long to be part of the world that I wasn't allowed to be part of, more than ever, once I got in my teens and started listening to the music. When I was in the 9th grade, I went into the 9th grade in my hometown. Something happened that would change everything. I mean everything in my life forever. And I still have no idea who did this to me. Someone wrote a letter to my mom, an anonymous letter. I was 14 years old, and they accused me of being out in public somewhere, behaving in a manner unbefitting a Jehovah's Witness. To this day, I don't know what I did. I just wanted to die. I did not want to get sent away. 80 miles away. I swallowed a whole handful of aspirin right in front of my mom, just desperately trying to make her see what she was doing to me. But didn't faze her. I had to go. She said, pack your stuff. But it eventually brought relief because even though my sister and her husband, and she had 2 little girls, even though they were Jehovah's Witnesses, they weren't nearly as rigid as my mom always was. In fact, my sister would sit down and talk to me. She genuinely cared. She's always been my idol. I just loved her more than anybody in the whole world. It's hard because she's gone now. So there I was, the new kid in school in this little bitty town, little bitty freshman high, 80 miles away from everything I'd known. But it kind of forced me to be a little less fearful of everything. Oh my gosh, I was fearful of everything. So I settled in and started looking forward to going home after school. I got to go home after school, and my sister was an excellent cook. She even made homemade bread. I'd walk in the door and the house smelled like homemade bread, and I was relatively happy. And I'd always been told that I was not allowed to date until I was 15. So when I turned 15, my sister allowed me to go out on a date. It was a blind date, a double date, blind date. And before long, I was going steady with an 18-year-old senior named Steve. And he took me to a senior party, and life was good. They let me literally live quite a normal life. I really don't even recall going to the Kingdom Hall a whole lot with them during that time. They were so lenient with me. I would go spend the night at a girlfriend's house or something like that. But everybody at the senior party, I remember, was arrested for drinking, underage drinking, except for us, because I didn't go for that stuff, and I really was a good girl in here, and I begged Steve, don't drink, and so he didn't. And the next day, of course, it was all on the paper, all these kids that got arrested at this party. So my sister wanted to know if the party that Steve took me to, if it was that party, and I lied, and I said no, that was not the party he took me to. And his mom took me aside and thanked me, because she said, I know why you weren't arrested, because Steve told me you asked him not to drink, and so he didn't. And I tell you what, from that day on, I loved my boyfriend's mom. Her name was Louise, and I loved her. So my mom had always demanded I also get a job as soon as I turned 15, so I became the world's worst car hop. Because I was afraid of everything. I would dump things on myself, and I ended up getting fired. But I ended up losing my virginity at 15 years old, because when I told my boyfriend that I was still a virgin, he laughed at me. He said, nobody's that anymore. And so suddenly it became more important to be accepted than to be a virgin. And right after it happened, he came to see me, and I was wearing shorts, and he laughed at how white my legs were. And my world was over. My world ended all over again. It was awful. I spent the rest of my life trying to get a tan. It's just ridiculous. Because I didn't want him to make fun of me. Thought I'd look better if I lightened my hair a little bit, so I asked Mom if I could lighten my hair. And the neighbor lady screwed it up and bleached it blonde. It was platinum blonde. I about had a cow. But Steve liked it. And, we were going steady. We were spending every day together. He raced motorcycles, so he took me to watch the races, and went to the beach. We went to the movies. I never had to spend one day alone anymore. And I was happy. And life was good. But I made the mistake of confiding to my Jehovah's Witness cousin that I had lost my virginity. And that cousin told their mother, and the mother was my mom's sister, and so it got found out. And I was forced to go back home, back to my mom's. Here I had tasted freedom and love, not just by my sister, but by my boyfriend's family. And now I had to go back to the isolated loneliness in my hometown. And I caught tonsillitis not long after I got back to my hometown. And I mean, it was a severe case of tonsillitis, and I was vomiting. And just to kind of give you an idea of how little my mom regarded my feelings, she apparently thought I was pregnant. And rather than just coming out and saying, "Is there any chance you might be pregnant? Is that why you're throwing up?" She told me she was taking me to the doctor to have my tonsillitis checked, but I was subjected to a pelvic exam. Completely mortified me. I'd never had one. I didn't know why it was happening to me. And then it occurred to me that my mom probably thought that I was pregnant. You know, most normal parents would have approached the child and would have asked, but not me. And I had to get a job again, and so I worked there across the street from our home in an ice cream place. And there was a jukebox that had lots of the music that I loved, and I'd crank it up when my favorite songs would play, and I started smoking, and I decided if my mom thought I was so bad, I'm going to be bad. I saw my mom as the cause of every painful thing in my life. My mom and her religion. And now I'd lost the man that I was sure was going to be my husband, that I had hoped for my entire life. And there I had given my virginity up to him. And he was gone. I wasn't even able to get the slightest smile on my face. I mean, I was a mess. And I think my mom must have kind of felt sorry for me, because I remember her buying me a guitar, and which was a blessing. I mean, it filled up my time. I would sit and pick out songs by ear. I never knew how to play it really, but I could play it by ear. And I'd sit for hours and pick out songs. It was literally my salvation. And I was going into the 10th grade. So while I was in the 10th grade, another thing happened as a Jehovah's Witness that changed my life forever. I mean, forever. The governing body had let it slip, or it was announced in one of the magazines or something, that new light was coming out, and everybody was buzzing about it. Of course, that meant it was coming from God. And so when the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society announced that Armageddon would most likely occur by the year 1975, I believed it was my death sentence. I was 16 years old, and I totally believed that I had 9 years left to live, at the most. That meant there was not much time for me to have my dream of being married and having children someday. I became so hateful towards my mom. I made her life miserable. My friends called her the warden. I had no way of knowing that my mom was going to be dead in 5 years. But believing like I did about the nature of God and eternity literally created a monster in me. To this day, if I see a rebellious person, I think there's either a religious spirit at work somewhere in their life, or a root of rejection, because it makes you freakish. It makes you freakish. But when I'd moved back home with my mom, she'd been allowing me to go out with my friends once in a while, as long as I cleaned the house, and I cooked supper. I had supper ready when she got home. I found out later that I think it was just because she would let me go as long as I did my chores, but then that way she had something to take away from me if I rolled my eyes or had a bad attitude or didn't do everything that I was supposed to do. And I spent weeks and weeks grounded. And that was to her advantage. I can't recall a whole lot of my sophomore year. My head was just filled with destructive thoughts. I faked a smile at school every day, but I was back to being home alone all the time, going home to an empty house. My closest friends were all the broken kids who smoked, and they'd come over and I'd pour my heart out to them. Despairing thoughts that screamed ugly things in my subconscious were my constant companions. 3 of us girlfriends made plans to run away, change our names, save our money. We had jobs, we were going to save our money, run away, change our names, move to New York City, and disappear. Well, am I glad we never tried that. God only knows what would have happened to me. But it gave me a purpose to live. And so, I mean, by now, Steve was attending trade school 300 miles away. He never came back around again. My mom told him that if he did, she'd have him arrested and put in prison for statutory rape, because I was 15 and he was 18. And so he stayed away. But I took typing and shorthand and general business and loved it all, because I had this newfound purpose that I was going to try and run away to New York City and get a job and live anonymously. My mom allowed me to go with my friend Mary to a teen dance place called The Barn. And it was a Sunday night, and there I met this guy who was 4 years older than me, and who I just really liked right away, because he made me laugh, and he liked to dance, and he offered to give me a ride home. And I think Mary had her own car by then, so she went on home, and this guy, his name was Greg, he took me home and kissed me at the door and picked me up for school the next day and gave me a ride to school every day from then on. And then one day, he showed up after school and took me to a friend's apartment and had his way with me, which was very much against my will. But I was kind of consoled over it, because he also showed up like days later with a diamond and asked me to marry him. So even though my soul had been too broken to openly resist his advances toward me, I accepted the diamond, and of course my mom wouldn't let me marry him. And so, I mean, I wore it to school every day anyway, and just kept it hid when I was home. But his family became my family. I mean, they bought me my first birthday and Christmas presents. He had a job, so he took me out to fancy restaurants, and I finally told him my mom refuses to sign for us to get married, and we decided that maybe if I got pregnant that she would have to sign for us to get married, and that way I would have my lifelong dream of being married and having children someday before God destroyed me at Armageddon. So that's what we set about to do. I mean, I was only 16 years old, and before long I felt very old and very used. One night my friend Mary called me, and she said that she had seen Craig with another girl. And so I broke up with him. I gave him his ring back, and about a week later, I started having morning sickness. But I never told Greg. I kept it to myself. I never told anybody. I didn't know what I was going to do. And at this exact same time, I walked out of school one day, and there sat Steve, my first boyfriend, first love of my life, sitting on his car in the school parking lot. He had driven up there and waited for me to come out. And we became friends. And he would come up and see me when he could. I mean, it was a long drive. It was like a 3-hour drive from where he was living at the time. But when he could, we'd get together and talk. And that's all we did. We didn't do anything else. And finally, I had the guts to tell him. I thought I was pretty sure I was pregnant. And he said we could say the baby's mine and get married. And so I was having morning sickness one morning for about the umpteenth time, and my mom saw me, and she said, "Is there any chance that you might be pregnant?" And I said, "Yes," and started to sob, and she wrapped her arms around me. And it was the first time my mom had hugged me, I think, ever in my entire life. And she said she understood, and so I told her that I'd seen Steve, and that he had offered to marry me, wanted to say the baby was his. And she agreed. She agreed. I mean, she tried to get me to put my baby up for adoption, which made me terribly angry. This had been my lifelong dream. She knew nothing of who I really was. And so she backed off when she saw that I wasn't having that. And so on June the 3rd, 1967, Steve and I were married at the Justice of Peace. 2 days later, he had to go to boot camp. That was back during the Vietnam War, the draft. And so I was right back living with my mom, and he was gone. I'm married now, and my husband's gone to boot camp. And I finished the 11th grade that week. And the Jehovah's Witness, the congregation overseer, and the other leaders of that congregation that I had grown up in came to the house. They're called a judicial committee. When you do anything immoral or against the rules, you get a visit. And instead of just coming in and sitting down and talking to me, what they do is they put a kitchen chair in the middle of the doorway in the living room and made me sit on it. And they sat on the sofa and kind of interrogated me. I mean, they were kind. Like I said, it was a good congregation that I was part of. And they just wanted to know what my intentions were as far as being a Jehovah's Witness or not. And I was honest. I said I honestly did not know what I was going to do. They made their decision, and it was announced publicly that I'd been disassociated, which meant that even though I had not ever been baptized, I would have to be shunned by all Jehovah's Witnesses, which included my entire family, for my immoral behavior. So there I was, living with my mom and being shunned. And my mom actually wrote a letter to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society to get their permission to find out if it was okay to pray before meals out loud in front of me. Her God seemed like a mean-spirited bully, but I knew that I had acted wrongly. I got a job and tried to make it through every day. I rode a bus to see my husband when I could, and I moved out to California and lived with him when we were finally able to do that. I had told you that I would tell you why it was that my mom didn't ever pursue having my dad arrested, and I got a job. Like I said, I was only 17 years old. Me and the girl I worked with had gotten invited to go to a swimming pool. It was hot summer, and she and I went. She kind of had a crush on this one guy that was going to be there, and I was a kid. I was doing backflips off the diving board, for heaven's sakes. I was having the time of my life. I got home before dark, and my mom accused me of doing something immoral. And I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was the farthest thing from my mind. And she even threatened to call my husband. And this was before, obviously, that I'd moved in with him. And I said, how could you even think such a thing? That's what it was. I said, how could you even think such a thing about me? And she said, because I did it once. And I was like, what? She said, I couldn't figure out what was so great about being unfaithful. Your dad was unfaithful to me over and over again, and so I tried it once. And I realized for the first time why my mom didn't have my dad arrested, because she really had not been sure whether he was my father or not. And I was pretty livid. And I went outside and sat on the porch, and I just cried and cried. I went to bed that night really, really shook up, but for the first time, I was able to see my mom as a real hurting person. And she'd always needed to be so flawless and perfect, and now I knew she wasn't. And I mean, it made me love her again, just like I had as a very little girl. But she'd been wrong about me. I mean, there was no way that I was thinking anything like that. I felt completely indebted to my new husband, and I loved him. I felt like he'd rescued me and my unborn child, and I mean, I intended to be just the best wife to him that I could be. September, all my friends returned to school for their senior year, and I flew to California and got an apartment, and we were living out there. Next, we had to move out to the state of Washington, and we weren't there for maybe just a couple of weeks, and Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on our door. And so I'm going to let that part be part 3